The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise with a motion.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members of the House, last night, actually early this morning, the delegate from Arlington, Delegate Lopez, lost a loyal constituent, and I lost perhaps my greatest supporter. My father, Dick Sullivan, passed away last evening, or this morning. He passed away at a place called Goodwin House, which is in Bailey's Crossroads in Fairfax County, which is a remarkable place, staffed by angels, a continuing care community that cared for my father and my mother in her last days as well. My family and I are deeply grateful to Goodwin House for the love and the care that they provided both of my parents in their final days. My dad was born in western Pennsylvania, raised by a widowed single mom in a home crowded, little tiny home crowded with 3 generations of Sullivans and Williamses. At 16, at 6'4" and all of 160 pounds with his shoes on, he left for college. Went to Allegheny College in Meadville, Pennsylvania. Then, of course, the Army, then grad school at the University of Pennsylvania. Along the way, he married my mother, and they finally settled in northern New Jersey because my father had a job in New York City. My dad went to work for the Port Authority, now known as the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And he worked his way up from the lowest levels. When we were going through some of his documents the other day, we found a pay receipt for $2,500 a year, I think, was his annual salary when he started. But he worked his way up, and in the beginning of the 60s, Mr. Speaker, my father became what was known as the director of the World Trade Center. And during the 60s, my father, for the Port Authority, built the World Trade Center. He didn't swing any hammers or cut any steel, but he was in charge of the project. And I, as a 5-year-old kid, walked in the hole in the ground that was going to become the World Trade Center. And I stood on the 110th floor with my siblings and my mother before it had windows. My mother was terrified. But it was a remarkable project. You know, my dad always thought that the goal of the Port Authority to build the largest building in the world was sort of silly and pretentious. But the accomplishment sort of grew on him. Later on, when the Sears Tower was built in Chicago, I called him and I said, "Dad, they're building the Sears Tower. It's going to be 100 feet taller. What do you think?" And he said, "Yeah, but we've got 2 of them." So after that accomplishment, he left the Port Authority, Mr. Speaker, and he went on to move to Washington, D.C., which is how I got to Northern Virginia. And he became part of the senior management of an organization that rebuilt the failing railway system in the northeast part of the United States after the Penn Central bankruptcy. So my dad was a builder. He built things. But what he was most proud of building was my family. 5 children, 13 grandchildren, and 5.5 great-grands. The half is my second grandchild who's coming in a few months. And we were able to tell my dad about that coming great-grandchild before he died. He and my mom built a family that's been described by some as a force of nature, and we are forever grateful to them for doing that. He was most proud of building that family. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that it has been remarkable here. I didn't tell anyone in this building or in any of these buildings until about 7 o'clock this morning, and by 8 o'clock I was already being greeted and consoled by so many of my friends here. My dad was the latest, or the last, from my side of the family, of the greatest generation. And he lived a long and impactful and inspiring life. As my brother would say, not bad for a skinny kid from Erie, Pennsylvania. So, Mr. Speaker, this morning with a heavy heart, I move that when this body, my extended family, adjourns today, it do so in honor and memory of the man whose name I am proud to bear, Richard C. Sullivan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate Sullivan moves that when the House adjourn today, adjourn in the honor and memory of Richard C. Sullivan. Those in favor of that motion shall rise. Motion's agreed to.